We know that there are people on TikTok and on Instagram that have massive followings, and this is literally all they do. They just tell you stories, and they're really good storytellers, or they just happen to be incredibly good looking. So you're saying, well, Chris, I have none of those things. What am I going to do? Am I totally screwed from participating in this personal branding game? Absolutely not. You have something else that they might not have, which is most of my young adult life from ages 0 to 19, I'm in that inauthentic place. I'm hurting. I'm looking to find who I am, to know my own identity, and it's being formed by other people's opinions of me, feeling very insecure about myself, wanting to disappear, quite to be invisible.
For the person that's in kind of that losing cycle, what is like one piece of advice you would give that person of like, it just starts to reverse that momentum loop, like something that they can just start to focus on?
The answer is surprisingly simple on this one.
Today's guest is Chris Do. His first company, Blind, grossed over $80 million. It was a brand design consultancy business. He's now a full-time educator. You've probably seen his YouTube channel, The Futur. They have over 2.5 million subscribers, over 300 million views, teaching people how to make a living of what they love. And that's exactly what we discuss in this episode, is how you can go from working at that job that does not feel like a fit to you. How can you go from that place to running and operating a personal brand that is making you a living? And one of the things I love from talking with Chris is that he really goes deep into the principles, the mindset, the exercises that you need to do so you can come with a clear vision of what your personal brand is, and then you can translate that to content. And right at the end of the conversation, we talk about the monetization piece, which is, first of all, when will you know that you're ready to monetize? And then not only how can you monetize, but how can you offer services that will lead to you being oversubscribed, lead to you having almost too many people willing to give you money for what you do. This is an episode that I wish existed a year ago, 2 years ago, when I started this podcast and when I started building my personal brand. So in the comment section, let me know how you like it. And without further adu, let's get into it. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here. You look like you're in a majestic background. I don't know what's going on here.
I know. I told you I've been following you since 2017. We had to pull out all the stops.
You certainly did.
Now you have a nice studio where you're at as well. Okay, let's get into it. And I want to talk about personal branding and marketing. And I think a lot of the best businesses, a lot of the best brands, what they do, it's personal to them. And it's interesting because I remember this quote from Deion Sanders. He's obviously managing like the Colorado Buffaloes. And they were like a huge underdog in a certain game, and they came out and they won. And afterwards he said, "This is personal." They're like, "What motivated you?" He's like, "This is personal to me." And so one of the things I saw it on your website, I've seen it on your YouTube videos, I've seen it in podcasts that you do, is this mission of teaching 1 billion people how to make a living doing what they love. And so here's where I wanted to begin. Why is that personal for you?
Very good question. Okay, it's personal because as an immigrant refugee to this country, my parents emphasized the importance of education and how that can be a ladder for your future success. And having lived the American dream, going to school and building my business and reaping the rewards of that, I feel a great sense of like debt, like I'm indebted to this country for opening their arms to us, giving us the opportunity. And we basically turned tragedy into triumph. And so I feel like it's important for people who achieve something to lend a hand to someone who's a little bit behind them to help pull them up. So it's not just talk, words, but it's actually action and deed. And that's why I'm really committed to this mission.
You know what? I'm curious. When did you have that realization of like wanting to give it back? Because I know that you've built so many businesses. Like you're kind of good personally, right? So yes. What was kind of the moment where you were like, okay, we actually need to pay this forward?
I think it's the idea that, you know, you have goals and you think Having financial security will bring you happiness, and that's what you work for. And for most of us, we never quite get there. But when you actually get there, and I'm having this conversation with my financial advisor, asking him, his name is John. John, when can I retire? My wife says like 2 years from now, like just earn enough money. And he goes through the books real quickly. He knows my numbers. He goes, based on what you have, what you own, what you've saved, and how you spend money, you could have retired years ago. And I was just shocked in that moment, like, wait a minute. So what's this all about then? And so I go and confront my wife. She was there in the room. I'm like, babe, you've been telling me I need to work more. She goes, no, I never told you that. I'm like, what? What are we talking about here? You literally told me 2 more years. Give me 2 more good years, babe, to have that financial cushion. So once you achieve securing financial means for your family, for your children, and for people you care about in your life, you have to ask yourself a much bigger question is, what is the purpose and the meaning of my life? Have I discovered my gift? And if I haven't, then I need to figure that part out, because now we're free from like working to make a living. And that's when I start to really dig into myself, and I realize something deep inside of me. My truest identity is an educator. It's not as a graphic designer. It's not as a director, and it's not as an entrepreneur, but it's an educator. And what I want to do more than anything else is to teach people. So this is now perfectly aligned with who I'm supposed to be in this life.
Now, that's so good. And you know what's interesting is most people never find their unique gift. Like they go through their whole life. You never find that thing that was like meant for you. You were uniquely supposed to do it. And it reminds me of this quote. I heard you say it. You say, when I try to teach people about personal branding, it's not so much I'm trying to sell you anything. It's mostly I want you to know who the hell I'm supposed to be in this life. And I want to heal and show up 100% as I am. And when I can do that, oddly enough, I seem to attract more people to me. And so I love that quote because it's such a nice way to think about branding and marketing. But the way that my brain works, when I heard you say that and speaking about healing yourself, showing up 100% in the way that you're meant to, I thought to myself, like, what's the moment in Chris's life when he was the exact opposite of all of those things? When you were not healed, when you were not authentic, when you did not know who you were. Like when I even say those things, what's the experience? What's the story, the moment that kind of comes to your mind?
I think most of my young adult life, from ages 0 to 19, I'm in that inauthentic place. I'm hurting. I'm looking to find who I am, to know my own identity, and it's being formed by other people's opinions of me, feeling very insecure about myself, wanting to disappear, quite to be invisible. And there's a lot of different factors that contribute to this. And just for context, people need to know a few things. I'm an introvert. I'm an immigrant refugee. English is my second language. So we lost our country. We lost our language. We lost our customs and our culture. We lost so much when we fled Vietnam due to the fall of Saigon. So we come to America where people don't look like us. They don't sound like us. And I'm having a hard time adjusting because my parents are not also people who understand American culture. And they're busy working. So there's really no one here to explain to us how things work. All I can see were the radical differences between the people I saw on TV, in magazines, and in school. They didn't sound or look like us. And so that creates this kind of disassociation. Like, I don't know who I'm supposed to be here. And then I'm also a middle child. So that means I have people-pleasing tendencies. I have caretaker tendencies. And so you put that into this ball, and then that would pretty much explain why I am the way I am. And there were some moments of racism, some anti-Asian hate way back in the day. We're like a lot less welcoming and progressive here in America, in California, than we are today. And we're still struggling through some of this stuff. And so, of course, one could explain, no, there's no wonder why you feel so out of place everywhere you go. Add into it one other ingredient. I'm a highly sensitive and observant person. And this does not fit into stereotypical male roles. It doesn't feel masculine to be a person who's like thinking about my skincare, or to look at patterns and textures in homes and in clothes and thinking about creating things. Everything that boys my age wanted to do was the exact opposite of what I wanted to do. I wasn't really into sports. I'm not into kind of like these machismo attitudes that men tend to carry with them. So my best friends in school throughout, I guess, junior high through college were women, and they They weren't guys. They weren't men.
Mm. I'm curious, was there like, because I think it's relatable. I think we, especially when we're growing up, we have these moments where you're like, you feel almost like a misfit, like you don't fit into the traditional roles or what you're meant to be. And for a little while, it's like you try to like force yourself into it. You try to assimilate. And then there's kind of like a turning point. There's a point where you're like, you know what, I'm just going to go all in on myself. And I'm curious if you remember that moment, the turning point. What comes to mind?
The turning point isn't as stark as a 90-degree turn. It's a gradual process. And I do remember certain points. Number one, when I got accepted into art school, that was a big point for me because I think finally I found a skill that I have and I want to amplify that. I want to learn. I want to be surrounded by the best. So getting into Art Center College of Design was a big turning point for me. And then finding myself amongst a lot of creative people and seeing where I stack up amongst them was an important defining moment for me. I was told and led to believe that everybody at Art Center is going to be 10x better than me. So I was going into it very humbly, wanting to learn, knowing that I have a lot of work to do. And so I focused on doing that work. And then slowly I started to realize I'm as good, if not better, than most of my classmates. And this thing that seems challenging and puzzling to them is coming rather naturally to me. And I add a good dose of like a solid work ethic, grinding it out, having what do they call it? All-nighters, helped me to even edge out. And so I started to find an identity. It was one I was going to carry for a number of years, but now instead of it's Chris, the generic human being, it's Chris, the graphic designer. And so whenever I would meet somebody like, well, what do you do? I'm a graphic designer. I'm a graphic designer. I would say that over and over again. So now I have the foundations to build something on top of. And then over time, it starts to grow and expand beyond that definition before it reverts back to the core definition or core identity, which is an educator. So it was a gradual process that happened over time.
Okay, nice. Okay, where I wanted to go next. So I mentioned I started watching you in 2017,
Mm-hmm.
and at the time I was trying to build a clothing brand. It was the first business that I ever tried. It was a spectacular failure. I don't hold you responsible for that.
Okay.
And I came back to you actually a few years later when I was trying to start an agency and I wanted to learn sales. And then you have like these role plays on your channel where someone's literally giving you scenarios and questions and you're kind of going through it and you're pausing it at certain moments to like say how you would deal with a certain situation. And you were always so certain. That was the thing that came across to me. It was like you always knew the right thing to say, the right question to ask. And so I think when it comes to those sort of scenarios, it's like most people don't know the right thing to say. I know for me, I didn't know the right thing to say. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, what was the moment in your life where you didn't know? Like you were dealing with these kind of sales scenarios or business questions, client questions, and you didn't know the right thing to say. Like what was even the environment? What was even the context around you? I'm taking you back here.
Yeah, you are. You're asking really good questions, Callum. I can tell that you've done the research and you know the material really well. So I appreciate that. I just want to say that to you.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Great job.
Thank you.
Years 1 through 3 running my business was the most awkward, weird, frustrating, fear-inducing, imposter syndrome building thing I could have done. I was rather impatient, Callum, in rushing to start a business when I shouldn't have started a business. And so I didn't have the template in which most people follow in order to mirror or to repeat what they've learned, right? So I'm a new graduate from school. I haven't done any real business before. And I decided I'm going to just start a business. So I'm on these calls. I don't even know how these sales calls are supposed to go because there was nothing in school that prepared me for this, to have these kinds of conversations, to be looking at the projects and the budgets that I was looking at in this moment in time. And so I was scared out of my mind and I fumbled so many calls. And during that first, I would say 6 months to a year, it was just losing one job after the other. I would just lose them, just looking at the money. There it goes, there it goes, there it goes. But luckily more jobs are coming in and I still would lose those jobs. And it became kind of depressing. It's just heartbreaking. I would console myself by saying, wow, at least they're considering us amongst these giants in the industry. Like the competition, the caliber in which we were competing against was so high. I said, okay, we deserve to lose. We're not that good. Later on, I would realize a fundamental, like just like the big epiphany, which is it's actually not the quality of the work. The quality of the work gets you considered, but it's how you handle yourself on the sales call that actually gets you the job, which gets you the yes from them. And so when I learned how to do that and I got enough reps in, that now becomes second nature to me. And then the confidence starts to build.
Mm. You know what's interesting? So I left my job to do this podcast full time about 15, 16 months ago. And I remember I moved back. I'm living in New York now, but I moved back to New Jersey because that's where my mum lives. And I remember the first kind of like 6 to 9 months, it was so difficult. And at the time I was doing the podcast and an agency, and every single call I would get on would be tough. I wouldn't know what to do. It was like every decision, even the things that felt like it should be easy, or people when they would speak about their businesses, it seemed easy for them, felt incredibly difficult for me. And I would go into these sales calls and it would feel like I'd get right to the point where they were about to say yes, and then they wouldn't say yes. They'd go silent, or they'd go to someone else. And so I'm curious for you, because you mentioned that you kind of went through a similar period where it was like you just weren't getting what you wanted. I know from my story, there's one particular pitch moment that stands out of like, that one really hurt. Like that was the one where I put everything in and it still didn't go. Is there an experience like that for you?
I think it's like a cumulative experience. There are lots of them that hurt so bad. I'm not gonna lie to you. There were the jobs and the brands that we thought, my God, that would make our careers if we could do this. Or the budgets were so big. I'm like, gosh darn it, couldn't we just get that? And the one thing I would say, and hopefully as some form of comfort for many of you, is you think you had it bad, like you lost one or two jobs that you really wanted. Do it over the lifetime in which I've been doing this, and it is in the millions of dollars of lost opportunity. Maybe over $10 million. I don't know, because those are the kinds of opportunities we're looking at in total. So I try not to focus so much on the lost opportunity, because it can really beat you down. It can make you second guess yourself, which is going to only hurt you in the future. I try to look at each loss as, what did I learn in that moment? There's an expression in life, you either win or you learn. And so I'm like, okay, I clearly did not win. So I'm going to have to squeeze this bitter fruit to pull out what was good about this, so that I cannot do that again.
You know what's and I want to get into the personal branding stuff, because I think there'll be a lot of people that are listening, and maybe they're sitting at work or they've just come back from the office and they're doing something, they're dedicating their life to something that they know is not for them. And they can like feel it deep down. And I was in that moment, right? Where it was just like, I was doing stuff at work, I'd get assigned on tasks. I was like, this is not what I'm meant to be doing. And so the idea of a personal brand is deeply appealing, because it's like, oh, my job is just to be me. Like that is deeply appealing. And so I want to get some of the information of how people can kind of start that process of even building that personal brand and marketing themselves. But just to begin, I feel like personal brand is such a overused term. Like we hear it everywhere. And I think you're someone that really understands it. So when you even say, or when I say personal brand, to you, what does that even mean?
Okay, good question. And at risk of repeating some of the things I've said on different conversations, I'll make sure your audience understands this. I have a distinctly different view on what a personal brand is. So before I tell you that, I want to tell you what I think what most people use the word personal brand to mean, and then we can draw differences between those two. When most people say personal brand, I think what they're talking about is the crafting of social media assets such that it helps them to generate new business leads and sales. And so they're like, oh, my personal branding's on point. And then I look through their feed and I say, where are you in any of this stuff? It's you pitching something. It's you convincing me of something. It's you trying to establish yourself as some kind of person. And I can tell it's an act, and they're propping it up. And so for me, it's radically different. most people are not ready to develop their personal brand because most people are still struggling to find out who they are, to be able to pay the bills and not worry about whether or not they have enough runway to last 2 or 3 months. And so when you're in a survival mode, you don't have the luxury to sit back and look at how am I going to convey myself to the world? What is it that I'm ultimately meant to do? I'm not saying it has to be this way, but generally speaking, once you're able to deal with your basic needs, you start to contemplate the deeper meaning of your life experience and this journey that you're going on as a human being. So for me, personal brand, as it relates to the way that I understand it, is there are people that you'll see that are genuinely 100% authentic to who they are. And there's something really compelling about them that draws other people to them. And they're able to, by associating themselves with things and products and services and ideas, they're able to influence or sway people's opinions towards what it is that they like or prefer. And that's a very powerful thing that's happening. And the way that you do this, I forget, I think it's Shelley, I'm sorry, I can't remember who said this, but different is better than better. And that's a clue as to what I mean when I talk about personal brand. So as we're growing up, we're all trying to fit into society. I've shared my own story and struggle about like trying to fit in, not to stand out. And if you do that enough times, you start to lose a sense of who you are because it's always other defined and not self-defined. And so we move into adult life. We just repeat the patterns in which we've learned. So now you're out there, you're making content, you're an editor, you're a salesperson, you build websites, you build identity designs, you do podcasts. And what you do is you model yourself after what you think other people want from you. So again, it's just this gap between the real you and the you that shows up, the persona, to the rest of the world. And so for me, personal brand is like when those two minimize their gap, the real you and the person that shows up. Now, I want to caveat by saying this, that no one is truly 100% themselves all the time, everywhere to everyone, because that's not warranted. Okay. Like when you're hanging out with your best friend, you can probably say and do things that are unfiltered, that are okay because there's an acceptance between the two of you. But when you go on a date or you go to the White House or you go to a diplomat or a celebrity's place, you may act a little bit differently. And it's because socially, that's what you're supposed to do. You kind of turn up or down the amount of callum that shows up, and it's appropriate to do that. But what I'm talking about are the people who very carefully curate and edit their life to show you only the very good things about them, their success, their wealth, their family, their quality time. They might show you a whole set of books behind them that they haven't read yet to try to impress you that they're very knowledgeable or literate or maybe academic in their nature. But that's all a prop. When we strip that away, we find out who the real person is. And it turns out the real you is a much more attractive person than the person you pretend to be every single day, because we've become really good at sensing the fakery. We kind of know when someone is showing up being disingenuous, and it turns us off really quick.
Yeah. You know, one of the interesting things when you even say that is you kind of have to go through this process of even knowing who the real you is.
Yeah.
I think most people don't. I know there's periods in my life where I didn't even know. And so I'm curious actually from your story, is there a moment where like you thought that you were showing up as the real version of yourself, and then only in hindsight, so only upon reflection, did it become clear you're like, oh, that was the persona. That wasn't even the real version of Chris.
Yeah, this happens actually to this day, because we get into social situations that make us feel uncomfortable. And it just like the child inside of you starts to feel afraid again, unsafe, and starts to behave slightly differently. And you have to check in with yourself often and you say, hey, stop that. What are you doing? Why are you behaving like this? Why are you saying these things? Luckily, as you mature and you find greater sense of yourself and you figure out your identity, those moments happen less and less, and they're not as exaggerated. But we know this. When you're around, I'll tell you right now, if I'm around a bunch of tall people, I'm 5'8", I'm like, shoot, why am I so short? It starts to make me aware of how I'm different. I have to check in with myself. Like me stressing out over this around a bunch of tall people is like, I'm going to start acting a little squirrely, and I don't want to do that. And so I have to check in with myself. I'll give you an example though. When I'm around famous people, celebrities, there's always this moment where I have to ground myself and say, you know what, they're just another person. Because they've achieved more or more people know them doesn't make them any better or worse than you. We're just two humans going through the human existence, right? And so there's a couple times when I'll bump into somebody who's famous and I'm like, oh, what do I do? And I start like getting really weird. And I remember one time I'm at a bar. Hickson Gracie walks in. It's not a bar, it's a sushi restaurant, but I'm at the bar and he sits down next to me. I'm like, shoot, that's Hickson Gracie. I love MMA. He's from like the royal family of Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I turned to my wife like, babe, that's Hickson Gracie. Don't say anything. Don't look. And she looks right away. I'm like, oh, babe, don't do that. Right. And I didn't say anything because I was so scared to say something because I didn't want to interrupt him eating. Fate would have it, like not a year later, same bar, same restaurant. He walks in again. I'm like, this must be a place he goes to all the time. And there he is. And so this time I tell myself, yo, be real. Be real right now. And so I waited for a moment. I turned over and said, excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt you. I just want to let you know I'm a big fan. That's all. And I just wanted to shake your hand and congratulate you on all your accomplishments and the success you've had in both sports and entertainment. Then he turned over, stopped talking to his friend, and just started talking to me in the most generous way possible. And I got to tell you, the thing I remember the most is that this man is a feared fighter and his hands will break you. But when I shook his hand, he had the most soft, supple hands you could imagine. I'm like, that was something that stuck with me. And I kept telling myself, man, if you just have the courage to be yourself and say what you think, cool things can happen to you.
You know what's I think as humans, we have like this incredible radar for just sensing authenticity. And so often when we're afraid, I know when we're afraid to like make an approach or speak with someone, we're so worried about what am I going to say? It's like, what are the words that are going to come out of my mouth? But just the authenticity, the intent behind it, it actually makes the interaction work. It makes it go well because the other person can feel it. And just displaying that in the most kind of just honest way, the most genuine way is actually the best way to do it. You know what? One of the things that you spoke about, which I actually think is important, is this theme of being like in survival mode. And so often we go into like the tactics or like what the how-to of building a personal brand, but there's a sense of like also just understanding the timing of like, when is it even the right time in someone's life to be building a personal brand? Because if you're underwater financially or at your job or your living situation, it's not even like the right timing really to start doing it. I'm just curious what advice you would kind of have for someone who's like, they feel underwater. And I think a lot of people feel like that in today's kind of economy and the way that things are. People are getting laid off or there's like problems at their work. And they're like, can I even take the swing to do this? Because when you're starting to build a personal brand, it feels like the biggest swing, right? Like putting yourself out there in that way. And so what would you say to that person of like when they should even begin?
Okay, good question. I think the answer is going to depend on the individual, but I'll give you the broad view of what I think might work. If you look at creating content and defining your identity as a form of public journaling, I think it's a much less intimidating thought. Like most of us are encouraged to journal. We journal to reflect on the day, to kind of highlight moments that we're grateful for and things that we wish we hadn't done and the way that we'll do it better next time. But we keep these thoughts locked up in our notebook. So if we start to look at social media or building your personal brand as a form of public journaling, and we dial up slowly over time the amount of transparency that we're going to share, it's a gradual process. I think then it's less scary for someone to do. So you could be a 14-year-old person, you could be a 20-year-old person, or you can be a 77-year-old person. You could start right now. My son, for example, he is 20 years old, and he's been starting to explore sharing his thoughts, creating vlogs, and chronicling the things that he's doing. I think mostly just for himself. And I think it's a beautiful thing for me as a father to watch. And my wife and I will watch his content and say, oh, we're finding out a lot about his preferences and things that he might not say to us because of context and timing and those kinds of things. but it's nice for us to see. And so if we remove the fact that we're parents and we're just watching a young person finding their voice in the world and how they're exploring and navigating things in art and philosophy, or just how they think and process, it's a really neat thing to watch. And so if we just look at it like that versus, hey, I'm trying to grow the maximum number of followers or subscribers, or I want the maximum number of likes, and I'm only going to create the kind of content I think other people want from me. I think that's the first version, is the much more natural way that you start to step into who you are and building community around shared beliefs and values. I'll give you one example in real life that I think might make sense. I'm an introvert. So that means like when I'm in a room full of strangers, I feel really uncomfortable. I want to jump out of my skin. That's how uncomfortable I feel. I'm really awkward. I don't know what to say. It seems like everybody has friends but me, and I'm just going to stand there or sit at a desk. That's what I do. And I realized something. When I enter into a room where some people know me, my whole disposition, my emotional state changes dramatically. I'm like, oh, there's Callum. We talked earlier. Or there's my buddy Rodrigo, or my friend Mary, or somebody. And I walk over like, Mary, it's been forever. Like, I give him a hug. It's like, what's going on with your life? Tell me what's new. I feel much more welcome and then therefore included in the conversation. What building a personal brand at scale on social media is something like that, where the people that you haven't yet met are getting to know you, so that their ability to build connection accelerates really fast. The velocity of the friendship, or the amount that we find that we have in common, or the rapport that we can build, accelerates really fast when you've done that work ahead of time. So like you said, you've been watching the channel since 2017, and that you know a lot about what it is I'm thinking, but I am meeting you for the first time. And there's a familiarity with us that we don't have to be total strangers. And there's a warmth and a reception. So when you say, hey, I watched this, what are your thoughts on that? I know you've done your homework, and automatically my guard is going to lower. Trust is being built between the two of us. And hopefully at some point in time down the line, maybe a friendship might develop. And I think that's what it really means to start to develop your personal brand. And you can let a little bit of yourself out without fear of like massive blowback. And over time, slowly just dial it up so that who you appear to be online is exactly who you are in real life.
No, that's really good. I really like the way you think about it. And it reminds me of something that Gary Vee says when he says, document, don't create. I think in the beginning, when you're starting, it's like such a pressure to create. Feels like you're having to do something outside of yourself, make something new that you've never done before. But if you're just documenting, it's like it takes the pressure off. And you know what? I want to get deeper into this, how someone can start to build the personal brand and then also start to monetize and kind of see that way out of their situation. And I think the important place to start is really with the self-awareness. And there's this quote that I heard you say in an interview. You said, the problem is that people do not know who they are. They do not know what makes them them. They do not know what the origin story is. They do not know the moments in their life that have significance, so they cannot tell the stories. We need to develop a repeatable story, a story that people can share with others. And so, in light with everything you've even said in this conversation, that quote like makes sense. It resonates. But I'm also aware that that's like one of the most difficult things to do, is to like reflect on your own life. I don't know, like I'm 26, right? Reflect on 26 years of experiences and pull out stories that really show who I am. And so when someone comes to you and they like need guidance on how do I even identify the stories that are the unique like stories that I can share with someone else and they'll resonate with them, but they still kind of represent me, what advice do you give them in even identifying that?
There's a couple of things you can do. And there's an exercise that I usually give at lectures or at workshops that I run on personal branding. I'll tell them right now, you already have a catalog of amazing stories and they exist in your pocket. Like literally they exist in your pocket. If you reach in, if you have pants, reach in and pull out your smartphone, there's a bunch of photographs in there. And photos are kind of an interesting thing. It's like, what compels someone to take a photo? I think because they want to memorialize this moment. It's kind of weird. Like we're not really living, we're not fully present, but we're semi-present because we want to capture what's happening so that we can relive these moments later. So if it's a beautiful sunrise or sunset, you'll take a picture. If there's a leaf caught in a spider web that you think is really poetic, you'll take that picture. And if you're experiencing something with your friends, you're like, hey, somebody take a picture of us together because we want to remember this night or this moment together. If you're on stage giving a talk, you'll take a picture. So if you scroll through your photographs in your photo album, you'll start to see things, and not all of them are significant to you, but some of them are, and it's going to stir up an emotion, hopefully a positive one, but it could be an emotion that of sadness and sorrow where you're grieving. It could be anything, because stories and emotion are what make our memories. Without the story, without the emotion, we don't have a memory. And so the photos are a great way to kind of jumpstart a story that you want to tell. So what I do is I advise people to have a story bucket, create a folder on your desktop, scroll through your photo album, and just drag the photos into that. So the next time you need to tell a story, just go through that folder and say, there's an interesting moment right there. That reminds me of a story. And I'll give you an example, okay? When my son was younger, he was in the Boy Scouts or the Cub Scouts, and we had a father-son trip to Catalina Island. So I have a photo of him wearing his life vest, and we're out there getting ready to get on a kayak. It's like, hey, let's capture this moment, buddy. We take a photo. But the most interesting thing happened to us out there in Emerald Bay at Catalina. We both went overboard on a kayak because we're staring at starfish or something, not starfish, jellyfish, and we both looked at the same time. We tipped over. And what happened was we're pretty far out from the shore. It's a protected water, so it's not dangerous. We're wearing life vests, and we're trying to get on the kayak again. But my son is being pulled a little bit in a direction, and he starts to panic. Even though he knows how to swim, even though he has a life vest on, he starts to panic. And he goes, Dad, I'm getting pulled under. I'm like, shoot, this is not good. I'm like, what do you mean you're getting pulled under? He goes, the seaweed, it's pulling me under. He thinks they're like little arms and tendrils reaching out and grabbing his little feet and pulling him under. And I started to think, wait a minute. Kelp is not in deep water. Kelp is in shallow water. There must be a rock structure around here where the kelp is sticking to. So I said to him, and I yelled at him, I said, stand up. He's like panicking. He's like, what do you mean stand up? I'm like, stand up. And then he just goes like this. He just stands up. And then he has the silliest little grin on his face, and he kind of chuckles. I'm like, okay, you're fine. We're fine. We're going to get on the kayak. Eventually we get back on the kayak. And there's a story that I tell people. And the lesson in the story is this, that sometimes, quite literally, you can feel like the world is pulling you under, and that you let your fears kind of magnify with your imagination, that you feel like you can't take on the challenges in life. And quite literally, sometimes all you need to do is stand up on your own feet and you'll be okay. So that's an example of going through a photo album, pulling out a moment, finding a story that's really just you. It's a story that only I can tell in that moment because it's a story that's special to my son and I. And there was a lesson baked in, and I'm able to share this with the world. So that's one thing that you can do. Just quickly scan through your photo album, find something you want to share, and just tell the story. Get into the practice and habit of telling stories.
That is so good. And you're such a good storyteller as well.
Thank you so much.
You know, one of the things, so I want to make it so real for people. And I think it's really good advice of like, pull out your phone, go in the photo album, and you can go back years and years and years with iCloud and all this stuff. I can see photos from 2015 when I was a teenager. I guess the thing that I'm curious is like kind of the next step after that. Because let's say I have this album with all of these photos and I can even tell the stories from these different moments. When does like the brand business side of it come in? And here's what I mean when I say that. Let's say that I have an Instagram profile and I have a few pictures on there, and then I'm doing this kind of photo album exercise. And when I see something like a story that I have, I go on the story, like the Instagram stories part of Instagram, and I'm just recording myself and I'm just telling back the story. How does it not start to just build, like, is that me building an audience? Or is it just going to seem like these random collection of stories from my life? Like, at what point does it start to feel cohesive and actually make sense that someone's like, oh, okay, I understand what I'm getting when I follow this person?
I totally get your question. It's a very nuanced question that you're asking. So let's try and kind of separate some of the components to this thing. We know that there are people on TikTok and on Instagram that have massive followings, and this is literally all they do. They just tell you stories, and they're really good storytellers. they tend to be a little older, or they have incredible life experiences that we can't help but to want to know more about. They're somewhat already famous, so they're telling these stories, or they just happen to be incredibly good looking, and you're like, I'll listen to whatever you want. You could read the Bible or the dictionary and I'll follow along. So you're saying, well, Chris, I have none of those things. What am I going to do? Am I totally screwed from participating in this personal branding game? Absolutely not. You have something else that they might not have, which is an incredible skill. Okay? You have an incredible skill and you do something better than most people. And the skills acquired after putting in what Malcolm Gladwell calls the 10,000 hours of intentional practice. And it's not literal, it's just an idea. So if you lay brick, like you're a bricklayer, you're like, well, is there artistry in this? I don't know. I think there is. And I think for me to watch someone spread the cement and lay a brick in so it's perfect, or building arches with it, is oddly satisfying and soothing for me. And so if you have a skill, you demonstrate the skill and you can build an audience around your trade. And if your trade is something where it will benefit by you building an audience, this now meets two goals. I'm showing you how to do something, so I give value to you, my audience. It's visually satisfying. Maybe it taps into a little bit of ASMR. Doesn't require any language. And then now all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, gosh darn it, I need a new pathway, or I need a wall, or I need some repair done to my building. I'm going to call this person. And this can be done for people who mow the lawn, who walk dogs, because you have a skill and you do it better than most people. And you can do it in a way that feels fun and refreshing and gives me value in my life. Now, if we elevate this up to someone who's a professional. So the reason why I have a personal brand that I think is pretty strong is because I think about all the kinds of lessons I've learned in my life, and I try to share that with people via informational carousels or reels or things like that. Eventually, the audience starts to build and they follow you because of the value you give. But something weird happens here. Something that's very paradoxical. If you don't show them who you are at some point, they're like, this is some generic robot account who keeps creating this kind of content. I like it, but I'm becoming less and less interested in it. So now you have to start to weave in the personal stories, that my son kind of getting pulled in by the seaweed with, here's how you negotiate your next contract with a potential client. So you start to weave those two together and they make a beautiful tapestry. So there's value plus personality. That is the personal brand.
Okay, you know what? And this is the thing that I've experienced firsthand. There's kind of different levels. When you start sharing more of yourself online, you start sharing more content, there's different levels to it, right? So in the beginning, almost level one, you're just trying to post. You're like, okay, before I was just a consumer of content, I would just watch other people's stuff. I'd watch Chris Doe's stories or scroll through his carousels. And now I'm finally getting to the point that I'm a producer. I'm actually posting my own stuff and I'm doing it fairly consistently. So let's call that level one. Level two is actually the things that I'm posting are getting a certain level of engagement, of resonance. People are DMing me, people are commenting, people are following. And so what is the skill set of being able to go from level one to level two? Is it just purely your ability as a storyteller? Like if someone is in that moment where they're like, I'm posting, but it's not going anywhere. Like, what is it that they're missing? What's the missing component?
Okay. There's this idea. It's not a new idea, but one worth sharing again, which is writers have to read, right? And filmmakers have to watch movies. If you want to be better at content creation, you also have to be pretty good at consuming content. So the first phase really is just observation. Like what do I like? And you don't have to be so picky right now. You can follow a bunch of people, and over time you're going to say like, oh, I thought I liked that, but I don't like that. And you start to get a sense of like what you might want to do in the world. And we model ourselves after the people that we like. And this is a very natural way to learn. So you can say, I love the way Callum designs his background or the way he comes prepared. Like I'm looking at you right now and you're holding your iPad. I was like, why don't I use my iPad for questions? I don't know what I'm looking at. Maybe it's my notebook, but that seems like a pretty smart way to have a screen in front of you and be connected and present, but be able to ask certain questions. So we learn by looking at other people and being really observant and then peeling away like what are things I might try myself. So in the next phase, what we have to do is we have to be willing to look at it as a laboratory. We're going to do a lot of experiments and we're not going to overly invest in any one thing. We're not going to overproduce it. We don't want to spend a month writing a script, hiring a bunch of friends, shooting and then editing, because that's just too much emotional and probably financial investment into something. So we're going to try lots of things, and we're going to find out what gives us joy. And that's all we need to do in phase 1 and 2. The next phase would be like, the things that give me joy also seem to resonate with a specific audience. If those two things are aligned, we might say, here are the 3 things I like doing the most that seem to have the biggest impact on people. And we might want to be a little bit more refined in the next phase, where we're going to say, okay, here's the hypothesis now. I have some data and it feels good. Like, this is what I want to do, not what they want me to do. And you start to create content around that. This is really critical. I heard a YouTuber, her name is Sarah Dietschy, and she said that I do 5 for them and 1 for me. There's something like that, meaning I make 5 videos of what you want, and then I make 1 just for me. I think even that ratio, although it sounds pretty good, is not a good ratio, because 5 out of 6 times you show up not being yourself, not doing the things that give you a lot of joy. And I think the world would be better if we just did 1 for 1. Like, I'm doing this for me. It so happens to be for you as well. And if you do 1 for 1, you could do this forever. Somebody asked me this recently, and they said, hey, Chris, how do you avoid burnout? How do you just keep creating content? I'm like, why would I be burnt out doing the thing that I love doing the most? I love to teach, I like to experiment, and I like to make an impact on people's lives. This is the source of my life's energy. I don't want to do less of that. I want to do more of it because I'm having a lot of fun right now. So what people mess up all the time is they look at what's popular, what is getting a lot of engagement, and they forgot the component of like, what gives me joy? Those 2 things must come together if you want to do this for any period of time. Because otherwise, it'll feel like you just added another job to your life, and no one wants another job.
You know, that's actually it's really important. So you have this kind of experimentation phase, which is like key, right? Where you're just trying different things. It's like you're throwing the paint on the wall. You're trying to see what sticks and what people resonate with. And then you start to figure out like, okay, people love the 30-second reels that I do. And you start observing other channels and you figure out the format and everything that can work for you. And once you start to get clearer and clearer with specifically what the audience is liking, it's so easy. And I felt this, and I still go through this now. You start chasing the algorithm, right?
Yeah.
You start, oh, okay, whenever we do that sort of episode, goes off. And so you just keep doing it again and again. That blueprint, you keep rolling it out. And to your point, it starts to take the joy out of it. It starts to become that job that you're showing up for at 9 a.m. every day. Okay, go through this routine again. And so I'm curious, because I'm pretty sure you've had this in your journey. Where was kind of the point in your story with content creation where like you were chasing the algorithm? And then what was the point when it started to kind of come together where it was like, yes, we get the performance, but it's also, I'm making content that I would make anyway. Like the love is there. Like what was that?
Okay. Another good question. I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently than the way you've asked it because I'm not sure. Okay. And you can call foul on me if you want to.
Okay, go for it.
Okay. I'm 42 years old before I make my first YouTube video. I'm pretty comfortable in who I am and how I want to show up in the world. And I have to just get over the fact that a lot of people are going to see me and hear me say the things I think and feel that I would say in private, but not on video. So I'm really worried about the permanence of video content that's distributed through social media. Because at some point, someone pulls something out of the box and say, hey, you remember when you said that, when you believe that? See, you're wrong, right? So I was fearful of that. And that's a natural fear for a lot of people to have. But already kind of in my developed self, I'm like, I'm going to show up and do what I want. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I don't really, really care. Just like how we were talking about building your personal brand is the journey towards discovering who you are, healing all the broken parts, and coming together as this cohesive whole, the integrated self versus the disintegrated self. That is what I'm interested in. So when I make content, sometimes it pops and sometimes it doesn't. I'm not sitting there thinking, well, the latest trend is to put a red box and put flashing subtitles everywhere. And young people love to tell me how I'm not following any trends, how they call me a boomer, even though I'm not a boomer. Like, boomer, you should be doing this and not that. I'm like, you know what? I see that you have 4,000 followers. If that works for you, you do that. But this is what I'm doing. This is not for you. It's not for anybody. It's just for me. And I don't get depressed that the the post that I made doesn't pop, I don't really care. I've already resigned myself to believe this, Callum. We make really boring content to help people make money. The fact that anybody shows up is a surprise and a miracle every single day. That doesn't mean I'm stupid about content creation, because I look at how the retention graph works and I say, okay, why isn't that part working? And that's just data. That's good data for me to make sure that the thing that I want to say is being received in the right way. And so we use data and we'll challenge the team, like, what are we calling this video? And how are people naturally searching for this? And what does the thumbnail look like as relation to the title itself? And we play. And it's, for me, it's just a game. And it's funny because at the office, we'll get into like these little things like, I want to change the title of this. I'm like, no, I want to change it to this. And it's just fun for us to try this and say, okay, you think you know best? Let's go and let's see what happens. And sometimes I'm wrong. Sometimes I'm right. That's all. And for my team who's watching this, most of the times I'm right. I'm just putting it out there.
I like that. I like that. It's almost like you have to, if you treat the algorithm like a game, it actually becomes fun again. Just figuring it out. You know, I want to be considerate because I know we're right at 3:59. You have like 10, 15 more minutes, Chris?
I can give you another 10.
Okay, cool. Let's do it because I want to talk about monetization. And where I want to go, let's assume that, you know, I've gone through my experimentation phase. I've started to figure out what works. Maybe I've gotten my first, I don't know, 10,000, 20,000 followers. I'm producing content that I like, but it's also resonating with people. They're commenting, the engagement, all of that is good. And now I'm starting to think about, okay, really want to leave my job here. Like I really want to get out of this office. What is kind of the signs of I'm in a place where I can actually start to monetize? Like what kind of comes to mind for you on that?
Okay, I think the word monetize is complicated. It has many components to it. And I want to explain a couple different ways in which we can monetize so that we can do this more as our full-time thing and not as our part-time thing. Let's say you have a full-time job somewhere, and I'm speaking to my audience mostly, and you're a graphic designer. You design logos and identity systems, and you're pretty good at doing this. And then on the side, you're developing content to teach people how you design logos, how you make decisions. You're critiquing and reviewing other people's logos, and it's starting to take off, and something really interesting is happening here. You know it because of a couple of things. Number one, the followers, the engagement, the amount of people sharing and saving your posts. But you also know it in the DMs because people are going to say, hey, I love the way you think, the way you work. Would you consider working with my company? And so opportunities are going to naturally present themselves to you when you act out of generosity and you give value to people. Some of it comes back. People reciprocate, and it's pretty awesome. I'll give you an example right now. This is a silly one, but I've done role plays where I do this thing where I was not allowed to like say no to the client, and the client was really a nasty client. It's a role play. And I said, you know what? You can either pay me $1,000 or I will take 50% of the revenue moving forward for every new customer that you get above and beyond what you currently get. And everybody's like, haha, this idiot. No one would ever agree to that. Stupid. You know, and they're just trying to rip me apart in the comments. Whatever. You know, within the last couple of weeks, I've received more than 2 offers where they say, is this a real offer? Because we need help with our company. And they're not selling small things. They're selling very expensive things. We need help with marketing. We would be willing to negotiate with you to give you a percentage of future revenue. That video was not even meant to be a lead gen or to sell me at all. It's about teaching people a concept. So even when you're trying not to sell something, opportunities will appear if what you create is valuable for other people. It's kind of mind-boggling that people are watching that video thinking that it's real, and that even if it's not real, they still want to work with me. It's kind of wild stuff. So in this case, the designer has opportunities in their DMs, and they're going to feel those opportunities, and they're going to do that work to a certain point where if 50% of your total revenue comes from your side hustle, so if you get paid $100,000 a year to do design work as a staff person, and you get $50,000 of opportunities in your DMs, it's a pretty good time for you to start thinking about putting in your notice and doing this full time. That's one. Number 2 is when people think about monetization, they think about brand deals and sponsorships where companies send you free stuff. They get you to talk about it. That's pretty natural. So you can use affiliate promotion codes, which some people do and make a lot of money doing this. I have a buddy who blogs all the time, and he does $1 million in revenue in affiliate marketing alone. That's pretty wild because he commands a big enough audience that when they're there, they click on the products that they like, and he gets a small percentage of that. And the percentages for Amazon could be 4 to 5% for affiliate marketing, or for some people who make products could be 60 to 70%. What that's saying to me is the person who makes those products values your ability to sell it more than they value their ability to make it. So they're willing to give you the majority of the revenue so that they can continue to sell products. That's a signal to everybody who's listening to this that your ability to command attention, to draw attention to the things that you like and prefer, is actually very valuable. The risk and the mistake that people make is they monetize too soon. I want you to think of it like this. Here's the metaphor that I would like to make. Let's pretend like you've planted a tree, like an apple tree. Apple tree is going to produce fruit for the rest of its life for you. But if you cut that tree early, if you prune too early, it may never produce any fruit. So I say, for as long as possible, let that tree mature and then start pruning and picking the fruit, because it's going to produce food for you for the rest of your life.
Let that tree mature. Yeah. You want to see it come to fruition. You want to see it give you the fruit.
Right.
You know what? I want to give you two separate kind of scenarios. I think this will be really good for people, actually. I think we all kind of go through this experience in our sales journey. There's the point where we're like trying so hard to sell something, and I'm hard pitching it. I'm trying to listen to you, give you back all the things I think you're going to like. I'm trying to make my pitch perfect for you. And this can be like one-to-one, like I'm trying to sell a service, like I'm trying to do like an agency offer. It could be I'm a big creator with an audience and I'm trying to like promote a product for a sponsor. And no matter what I do, I cannot sell. That is the one reality. Then there's the other person, which is, and I know you know him actually, Daniel Priestley. He talks about being oversubscribed, having like, if you're the new shop on the block and you have like a line around the corner, like people cannot wait to buy from you. And so if we take those two different realities, and you almost take a bird's eye view and you observe what each of those two groups are doing, what is the difference? Because I know that there's people right now, right, that they might even be getting clicks and attention online, but it doesn't lead to sales. It doesn't lead to people buying from them. And so the people that have that line around the block, people are literally waiting to give them money. They're oversubscribed. What is it that they're doing that the other party is not?
Okay, lots of things to unpack there. Okay, we know this. If you chase, people run. So when you're desperate for a sale and you're pushing, most people will just run. They don't literally run, they figuratively run in their mind, saying, send me a proposal. And then you never hear from them again. Or like, great. Thanks so much. Talk to you soon. And they hang up and you never hear from them again. This is the result of you pushing for something so badly that the other person doesn't feel seen, heard, respected, or cared for. And trust has been broken at that point. Conversely, if there's another business that it seems like there's a lot of people who want it, where there's greater demand than the supply, there's something internal to all of us that is a trigger that we want it now. It's like the law of contrast. And it's an illusion in many cases. And it's something that if you know that it's not real, then you can actually create that even though it's not real, but you know that it works. This is where people may struggle with this idea that perception is reality. When I perceive something to be in demand or scarce or rare, then, and it's like a time-bound thing where it's going to expire really soon, I tend to act with greater urgency because I have to. And you've seen this countless times. We were recently at this restaurant. We walk in and the doorman says to us, do you have a reservation? We're like, no. He goes, okay, but I'll let you up. He lets us up. And then we meet the receptionist and she's like, do you have a reservation? We're like, no. Can you fit us in? She goes, let me see what I can do. And eventually she seats us in a place that could seat 50 people and there's 8 of us in there. What are they doing? What they're doing is creating false scarcity in this idea that not just anybody can get in. Some brands go to the extreme. The example that Daniel Priestley gives all the time is Louis Vuitton. and they're the world's most successful, I think, or most valuable fashion brand. What do? Security guard. There's a line. You can't even get in to give them money. It's really wild. And when you get in, it takes some time for you to find somebody to help you too. It's kind of wild stuff. And they don't jam pack the store with stuff. It's displayed, and then they put a lot of inventory in the back so that the salesperson can really be a little bit more curatorial when they show you things, when they see what you're interested in. They can guide you through the process. So anything that you can do to create this feeling that it's scarce, it's valuable, and that you have to act with urgency is going to help you gain some leverage when you're having that sales conversation with people. So for example, if you had reached out to me and said, hey, Chris, I'd love to have you on the podcast. I just want to give you a caveat that it's a 6-month lead time. That's why I'm reaching out to you now. That could be the furthest thing from the truth, but I'm like, shoot, I don't know who Callum is, but all of a sudden, like, if I want to be on his show and there's a whole bunch of people waiting to be on his show, I better make that decision right now. So you have to understand like how we're wired. And this is why people will send you promotions in your inbox, in your DMs, to say only one left, or act before the end of the day and get this additional bonus. They're using all these things to trigger in your mind, if I don't act now, I'm going to lose this opportunity. And it's this loss aversion bias that we have. It's also why people give you a free trial version of something that you can use for 5 days. Because even if you don't love it, you like less the idea of losing that thing that you don't even love. It's kind of wild.
You know, here's where I want to end, because I know we have to get out of here. It makes complete sense what you're saying, and you see it in everything. You see it even when you go to like a bar or a club where they'll keep a line outside of the place even though it's empty inside, to create this kind of demand, this perceived demand. And it makes sense that for the person that's like winning, for the person that's selling everything, that they're truly sold out, it's almost like the rich get richer, right? Like it's
right.
The fact that you're doing well is enabling you to do even better. On the other hand, momentum is so powerful, it works the other way as well. If the last 10 sales calls or the last 10 times that you did a brand sponsorship or whatever, it didn't sell product, the next time you're going or making a pitch to a brand or whatever, you're going to be there like with that energy of, I really need this. And so for the person that's in kind of that losing cycle, where they're doubting their ability to close the sale, they're doubting their ability to go to the brand and, act like they have this abundance when really they don't. What is like one piece of advice you would give that person of like, it just starts to reverse that momentum loop, like something that they can just start to focus on?
The answer is surprisingly simple on this one, Callum. People are stuck in the vicious cycle. And so like bad things happen. So then now we're even more scared. And because we're scared, we don't get opportunities. Because we don't get opportunities, bad things happen. Then you're right. The rich get richer, right? The rich have opportunities. They feel more confident. And then they have more opportunities. So they are more confident and have more opportunity. It's just like, what? How do we get out of this? And this is the really weird thing. It begins with you just behaving differently. And it's really wild, right? So I have a friend, his name is Carlos Segura. And he's known for having a little bit of an attitude when it comes to design. He prints it on his business card, the rules of engagement. You do this, I do that. And a lot of creative people feel very like, oh, this is like, this feels really cocky, or you think very highly of yourself. And they say, oh, Carlos, you could have these terms and making it difficult for clients to work with you because you're Carlos Segura. Like you're already famous. That's why you can be so demanding of your clients. He goes, no, because I'm demanding of my clients, I get to be Carlos Segura. It's just a flip in the perception. If you can take on one client this month, and that's all you can do, that's the only client you have, you can say, I'm booked up for this month. They don't need to know how many clients you have. You just say, I'm booked up for this month, but I'm looking for new opportunities starting in August or whatever. And so you're already telling people, you're signaling, I have finite capacity. And if you'd like to work with me, I just want to let you know that the next window that opens up, please reach out, because otherwise you're going to lose that opportunity again. Priestley refers to this as with or without you energy. I'm good with you, I'm good without you, and everything's going to be okay. So when you adopt this mindset, this belief, and you really believe it in your core You have a gift to share with the world. And if they don't hire you, that's their loss. It's not yours. And then all of a sudden you get booked and you get paid more. That'll make you feel more confident, and you're going to reverse the cycle, and you're going to move into the virtuous cycle versus the vicious cycle.
Yeah. You know what it is I love when speaking with you is like, it's just like the principles that you share, which is like, you don't even need to know the direct how to, you just need to understand the principles and it's going to give you everything else. So Chris, man, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much for making this happen. And whenever you're in New York, we need to get to this studio. We need to do another one. It will be very cool.
Absolutely. Part 2 is coming. My son is in New York, so I hope to visit him. And when I do, I'll reach out to you.
Sweet. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. It's really a dream for me that I get to do this. It's surreal that this is what I do full time and every week. So if you enjoy the content, if you enjoyed the conversation, the stories, please hit that subscribe button. It helps us immeasurably with growing the channel, with getting guests, all of those things. So please hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.